So my name's Doug. I'm the administrative director of Locksport International. You might have seen me upstairs in the lockpicking village. I'm also a geology student at the University of Texas. And I've kind of taken on like identification cards as a hobby for the past 2 years. And as a college student, you could see why that may be. So this is my presentation. We're going to talk about the history of identification cards. We're going to go on to the Real ID Act and how that's becoming a controversy. We're going to go into something a little more appropriate for the con, which is amateur ID manufacturing. And then we're going to touch on some high-tech ID concepts that hopefully we'll be seeing in the future. So we're going to go over the purposes and how we've come to rely on identification cards, basically the valid government uses, fake IDs, and influential corporations and organizations. So it's basically the automobile's fault. You know, we became to rely on driver's licenses around the 1900s. In France and Germany were the first to introduce them. And then New York was the first state to follow along, and eventually became like the de facto form of identification as more and more people started driving. So, and the inherent flaw with driver's license was that they were never designed to be identification cards. So that's the main problem we're seeing today, is everyone has a driver's license and they're being used as identification cards. And that's the issue that the Real Identification Act is trying to address. And we'll go on to that. Of course, there are many good uses of identification cards. They prove that you are you. They keep you secure in it's a constant struggle these days. You know, try to travel, work, or make purchasing, you know, they make all those things possible. You know, try to make a major credit card purchase or book a hotel room, or, you know, try to do any of those things. I challenge anybody to do that for a week, you know, without a driver's license or a government-issued identification card in their pocket. You know, it's a pretty hard thing to do. Things we have to, you know, worry about, you know, in countries like Europe, Central America, and South America, you know, that they require you to produce identification cards on request. And this is, you know, a problem that we could see in the future in the United States. You know, this could be a cause for hassle, you know, for no reason. You stop, you don't have your identification cards, you know, warrantless searches. And it's something we have to strive to work against so it doesn't happen in our home country. So in the past 10 years or so, we've seen a huge increase in the penalties surrounding identification cards. And I contribute to that mostly because of the 9/11 attacks. A lot of people will tell you because of the increased worries about underage drinking. And I mean, that's definitely a valid excuse. Although 9/11 was basically an instigator for what we've seen in an increased problem with illegal immigration. I think, personally, I think illegal immigration is the main cause in the increasing in penalties of increasing in penalties surrounding fraudulent identification cards. So, if you're familiar with 9/11 and the terrorists, they actually came across legitimate forms of identification, and they got these through legitimate channels. So, you know, that's a problem that should be addressed, right? So how fraudulent identification cards are obtained. They're obtained through online retailers. There's legal identification shops around town, and they make cards that, you know, look surprisingly similar to the real thing. And they get away with this because they have, you know, certain aspects of their cards that are slightly different than real government cards. And, you know, every once in a while these shops will get shut down or get raided. But for the most part, they stay in business because they do have these small aspects or small loopholes that keep them legal. Of course, your buddy makes them. He's probably pretty good at it too. And a main problem we're seeing today that should not be a problem is submitting the fraudulent applications through legitimate channels. And this is submitting your fake Social Security card or Social Security number and birth certificate of a dead relative or neighbor or something like that to assume their identity. And a problem that we most likely won't see going away is obtaining these documents through corrupt government employees. And I've read about people spending up towards to $10,000 on just a driver's license, as long as it's a legitimate driver's license, if they can get it through a corrupt government employee. So the market and cash that's available there is not going to make that go away anytime soon. So this was taken from the testimony of a Senate subcommittee on that was addressing the problem with identification cards, and it shows you how this is probably a process many of you have gone through, where you request your Social Security card from the Social Security Administration and your birth certificate from the Vital Records Office if you don't already have those, and then you send that in along with your application to the Department of Transportation or the DPS. Now, the problem is that when you submit the application to the Department of Transportation or the DPS, you could be submitting fraudulent applications. You could have requested documents from the Social Security Administration or the Vital Records Office, assuming another person's identity to begin with, so you would have someone else's documents that you'd be submitting along with your face on the application at the Department of Transportation, and then all of a sudden you'd have another person's identity. And the problem we see here is that most states, the majority of the states, do not validate any type of records with the Social Security Administration or the Vital Records Office. And what would end up happening is you would get an identification of someone else, of your relative or neighbor, and 6 months later they'll find out, well, that person's has been dead for 20 years. By then it's too late because you already have that card in your pocket, right? So these are issues that the Real ID Act is trying to fix. Some influential corporations and organizations. Digimarc Corporation is kind of the Microsoft of the identification card industry. This company is really unbelievable. They make 2/3 of the U.S. driver's licenses issued, as well as 25 countries' government documents, including Mexico and Canada. That's 60 million identification documents a year. L1, which is a smaller company, they produce the other third, the other third of the U.S. driver's licenses. And somewhere in between there's another percentage of states that produce their own documents. And if you go to your DPS and they give you a card on site as soon as you get your picture taken, there's usually much less outside contractor involvement. The states are actually making the cards themselves. And these cards that you get are usually the ones that are easiest to forge. There's the AAMVA, which is the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, which is my favorite government acronym. And they will be doing most of the coordinating effort when it comes to the implementation of the Real ID Act. And this is just a list of other organizations that was vital in the creation of the ID Act. You can choose your favorite acronym from the list. So on to the Real ID Act. We're going to talk about its purpose, its legislative history, the online standards and requirements, and then finally the controversy, which is the most exciting part of the whole topic. So its purpose was to establish new standards for state-issued driver's licenses. And this is on a federal level. So the federal mandate to define new standards on the state level. So you can begin to see there's already kind of a controversial issue here. And the official purposes defined by the Secretary of Homeland Security are boarding commercially operated airline flights, entering federal buildings, and nuclear power plants. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to be pretty upset if my ID card isn't going to let me get into some nuclear power plants, right? And then, of course, it's designed to fix the current system with the identification card industry. And we go back to the problem with that driver's licenses were never designed to be identification cards in general. Of course, curbing fraud, and then most of all, preventing illegal aliens from obtaining any federally recognized identification. And this is a major concern because, illegal aliens aren't going to be able to fly. Theoretically, they aren't going to be able to enter post offices, any type of federal building. So this is kind of like they're going to make the lines longer at the post office so they can check IDs. It's kind of ridiculous. So James Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin attention as a writer to the Supplemental Appropriations Act for Defense, Global War on Terror, and Tsunami Relief. There was never any committee hearings conducted prior to its passage. It was never voted upon. It was basically just attached as like a must-pass bill onto this more important bill. Of course, there were some problems. It was implemented in two phases. Phase 1 and Phase 2, there was two main problems. The states had very little support for the act, so it was pushed back. And what we see in 2011 here is when the federally mandates that all states have to begin conforming to this act. And by 2014, all citizens under the age of 50 must have this new enhanced driver's license, is what they're calling it. So if you do not have this new enhanced driver's license and you're under the age of 50 by 2014, basically you're not going to be able to fly on commercially operated airlines. And then the same goes for citizens over the age of 50 until 2017. So some of the other aspects of the ID Act is the linking of databases. So what we're seeing here is from now on, all the databases and all the DPS offices and all the Department of Transportation offices are going to be linked together. So you get a ticket in one state, they're going to be able to pull it up in another state. So there's no more running from the law. They're going to have data retention and storage outlines. So your documents like your birth certificate, your social security number, your biometric information is going to be on storage for upwards of 15 years before it's going to be allowed to be deleted. And by that time, you'll have to go in and get a renewed driver's license. So they'll have all your information on storage for 15 years in these linked databases that will be available to every state. And we'll discuss why that's going to be a problem in a minute. And then besides that, the main thing that we're seeing that's a difference between the current state of driver's licenses and the Real ID Act specifications is that all identification cards must have a common machine-readable technology. So they all must have the technology that can be read by the same device in every state. And otherwise, the IDs are really no different than what we see now. And talking to some key figures in the industry, what I've heard is that originally the Department of Homeland Security was trying to make a new secure document that was very hard to fraudulently remanufacture. And a lot of key stakeholders in the industry, a lot of the large corporations, were saying, well, if you implement these new technologies, then our current technologies are going to become obsolete. Our factories are going to have to be redone. We're going to lose huge investments. And the technologies that the Homeland Security wanted to implement were going to be contracted out to smaller companies, and so the bigger companies were lobbying against these new standards. And what ended up happening is the Real ID Act had a dumbed down version of what we could have as a highly secure driver's license. So it's really unfortunate that now our enhanced driver's license isn't going to be very enhanced at all. So the potential for fraudulent identification cards in the future is just as much as it is today. So Barack Obama opposes the act, and Hillary Clinton wanted the law to be reviewed, whatever that means. Mike Huckabee called the Real ID Act a huge mistake. The ACLU obviously said it could be abused by the private sector, and they mean this because the common machine-readable technology could be used to track you wherever you go. Let it be RFID, barcode, 2D barcode, magstripe. I mean, potentially people are worried it's going to be RFID. And we've seen a lot of controversy with that, especially with passports. But they're saying, no matter where you go, and every time you use your identification cards, you're going to be able to be tracked. You're going to be able to be commercially exploited, and it's going to be a big problem. Even some conservative groups are opposed to the act, like the Gun Owners of America. They're saying, well, if you're a felon in this state, then you can't buy guns in our state. They're saying we're going to lose gun sales. So we don't want that to happen, right? And then Eliot Spitzer was pretty confused also. Although he was giving all of its inhabitants in New York the right to vote by giving everybody a driver's license, he had a good point, because he wanted to give everyone the ability to have a driver's license, even if you're not a citizen of the United States. But he wants to keep driver's licenses and identification cards completely separate. And this is a different approach that many states are considering, and it's something that I think we should definitely take a look at before implementing these huge changes. Constitutionally, it's kind of an unfunded mandate. The states are demanding this stuff, and it's going to be a huge. The federal government is demanding these huge changes, and it's going to be extremely expensive. Again, we talk about the machine-readable technology would turn the cars into tracking devices. And then the linking of databases is going to be a problem, because of course, we see the weakest link in the chain is going to be the part where the system is going to be attacked. So everybody's information can be attacked from the weakest spot in the weakest spot in the chain, right? So we're talking about extremely expensive, extensive measures that must be taken to secure all of our data. And then we're talking about illegal aliens not having any source of identification. This is kind of a public safety issue, but we could talk about that for another 4 hours. So I originally made this slide, and I kind of forgot what the different colors were. And I still don't even know what the gray states mean. I don't really think I even know what those gray states are. Well, Nevada's up there, right? So this is kind of interesting, because the yellow states have actually passed legislation saying they're not going to cooperate with the Real ID Act, certain parts of the Real ID Act, until it's been changed. So, and then we have only 2 states that are completely compliant, which is California and Alabama, which is kind of opposite of the spectrum. Don't ask me why. There's a lot of corporation involvement, corporation lobbying going on here. And then we have the states that have passed legislation that have spoken out against the act, but have still willingly followed along, like Michigan, Illinois. Yeah. Thanks. Actually, the only state that there's one state that actually, it's all because of money issues that most of the states aren't complying. There's only one state that actively spoke out against the moral issues of the ID Act, and that's Utah. And they said, they're the ones making the points about the fact that it's going to be abused by the private sector, and that it's going to be, a problem for our national security. But, deep down inside, it probably is a monetary issue. So on to something a little more interesting. Manufacturing at home, what you need to do, what kind of materials you need, the equipment you need, the process, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the advanced production methods. And I worked really hard to get this guide out before the conference, and it outlines everything I'm talking about in extreme detail. And there's I'm going to be touching on a very small aspect of the different technologies and methods that you can go into when manufacturing at home. It's .pdf, right? Yeah. Sorry. Well, so So why would you manufacture at home? You can produce, and basically it outlines how you can produce high security documents for your organization, small business, or club. You can protect your privacy. It's not illegal to assume and alter identification as long as it's not someone else's. You can kind of start a little consulting business, which is kind of the path that I've taken. And then you can produce high quality documents that have nothing to do with identification, because the technology that we're using here can be used for many different things. And this is my just disclaimer here. Obviously, it's going to be a major crime if you're manufacturing government documents. All right, so what you need a printer, and I recommend the Epson Stylus R800 photo printer. It has like 7 ink cartridges in it. It's like a machine. It's an awesome machine. It uses something called pigment-based ink instead of water-based ink, and it's superior for printing on something called Teslin, and it's the synthetic paper that we're going to be using to print on. I'll go into that a little more in a minute. You're going to need a laminator, a die cutter, which is this thing you see on stage here, and that's used to actually cut the identification cards out of a laminated sheet. If you choose to use magnetic stripe technology, you're going to need a magnetic stripe encoder. If you're going to make a hologram, you need a rubber stamp with your hologram design on it. Now, there's other methods of creating holograms, but this is the method I'm going to explain right now because it's the easiest to demonstrate. A black light for admiring your work, a scanner for scanning in photos, signature pad for signing signatures onto the screen, Photoshop, and most of the equipment that I'm talking about can be bought at brainstormidsupply.com. It's my favorite vendor. In terms of the die cutter and the laminates and stuff like that, the magnetic stripe encoder and the computer equipment you can't buy there. So the materials you need laser Teslin. Now it's also called polyfin, and it's a synthetic plastic paper with superior adhesion qualities, so it adheres to the glue on the laminate, unlike normal printer paper or stock paper, which won't adhere to the laminate. And then Pearl-X pigment powders. Now this is like it's a powder, and it's kind of optically variable powder, and what it does is, you look at it at one angle and you might not see it. You look at it at another angle, it might be blue, gold, green, brown. Depending on the hologram you're trying to make, will depend on the color that you choose. And then if you're making UV-based security features, you're going to need maybe some pigment powder. You maybe want some actual UV-based ink, which you can inject into your printer cartridge, and you can print directly on the Teslin like that. That's another method that's outlined in the guide that's included. I guess it's on the CD. A transparent base, which we're going to mix the Pearl-X pigment powder and the ultraviolet pigment powder together, and we're going to use that to stamp our hologram onto our so this is my template. It has 8 IDs already printed out on it, front and back. On the back, it has the bylaws of my organization, Locksport International. On the front, it's the membership card. So what I do is I'll mix the stuff together. I'll stamp my template, and then I'll laminate it after that. And I'm going to kind of demonstrate all that with a video because I can't do it on stage like I was first expecting to. All this stuff can be bought all the materials can be bought at practicingperfection.7p.com, although I don't think it's up. I think you have to email him instead. He might take like several weeks or months to get back to you, but he will get back to you. But it's really the only place you can buy a lot of this stuff, like the ultraviolet pigment powders, and a lot of the stuff outlined in the guide. So you might want to write that down. Practicing perfect. I don't know if it's in the guide. It's definitely not in the guide. So if you're interested. So so basically the manufacturing process. I'm going to have a video here in a minute. You start off with the ID template, and then you have to create that according to your membership or your application. You have your printer template, and front and back. So you print the printer template. You add your hologram and your UV text graphics. You laminate it, you die cut it, and then you add your magnetic striping coating. So, let's see a video here. So I was originally planning on doing this on stage. But we didn't have a document camera, so we went into the bathroom upstairs and videotaped this. You can see why I went in the bathroom. This is me pouring out some white powder onto a sheet. It's about 1/8 of a gram there. So that was the UV pigment powder, and this is the Pearl X. And I'm going to make a gold hologram. So I'm using gold, interference gold. This is my transparent base. It's an acrylic. It's acrylic transparent base. It's like a medium. It's used to mix inks together, mix acrylic paints together. And then I have another type, which is water-based glazing medium, which makes the ink look glazy. Glaze, makes it have a glaze-like look. So what I'm doing right now is I'm spreading everything together with my finger. And I make a really even sheet across I'm using a shiny surface. I usually use aluminum foil, but right now I'm just using a piece of laminate to do this on. And I spread it out really thin. And when people attempting to do this for the first time, what they usually do is they make it way too thick and they glob on big. They use too much. So this is a stamp. It says Locksport International across. And I got that at simonstamps.com. And it's based out of Canada, so you can kind of make the stamps a little bit controversial if you want. And I stamped it right on my template, and that's Teslin. Right now we went to the bathroom and turned the UV light on. There's it reacting with the UV light, and you can see it says Locksport International. All right, that's me putting the laminate on. All right, that's the back laminate. It's a piece of laminate has mag stripe embedded in the laminate. You can buy that at brainstormidsupply.com also. And I didn't have a laminator, so this is a piece that was already laminated and cut in half. And I put it in the die cutter. All right. Thank you. Well, they're $10 per membership fee for Locksport International. All right. So this is a picture of what my template looks like on Photoshop. And what I would do is I'd have each individual file, and I would scan an image of someone's face, and I'd put it in my image spot, and then I would change the information in the different spots, and I would actually save a copy of that, and then I would flatten the image, and I would move it over to the printer template, which is what this is. I move over to the printer template, so I'd be able to print 8 identification cards at a time. And you can see the blue lines there, like the template lines, that will let you snap it into place so it prints perfectly every time. And that's something that will take you kind of a while to get used to. I mean, kind of a while to figure out. is to get everything printed perfectly. So, when you do it front and back, everything lines up with the mag stripe laminate, and everything lines up like the back will line up with the front. So another hologram method, which is a little more interesting, is the Alps printer method. And this printer's like 15 years old or so now. They stopped manufacturing them a long time ago, and they stopped supporting them about 3 years ago. So the only way to get one is to buy one on eBay for about like $900, and they usually come broken. So you have to like send it, sell it again, and then get a new one, and that one comes broken. So so it's a pain in the ass to get one. So, but what it does is you take a piece of laminate and you sprinkle the Pearl-X powder on the laminate in the color that you choose, and then you could put it in this printer. And what the printer does is it seals the pigment powder in the locations that you outline on the computer, and then afterwards you go through, after it prints, you bring it to the sink and you wash off the rest of the pigment, and what you're left is with like a stunning hologram. If you want to do multiple colors, you do it like one at a time. So you put the first color in, you pass it through, you wash it off, you put another color, another layer on the piece of laminate, and then you put it back through, and you do it on the side of the laminate that you're going to be facing down onto the Teslim. So this is, if you're producing like several hundred identification cards, a day, this is probably the better way to go. And you can also put UV pigment powder and mix it with the Pearl-X, and it works just as well. All right, so we're going to finish up here with the futuristic concepts. So if you've already noticed, PVC is kind of going obsolete. It's being replaced by this polyfin material, which is the synthetic paper. And this is what this is printed on right here. And it's basically a piece of paper, and it requires 2 pieces of laminate. And it's more tamper-proof, and it bends, so it doesn't crack. It's not brittle, and it's being used for the very high security documents. Holograms are being replaced by kinograms, which is kind of like a brand name hologram, which they kind of have like control over the market. You see them on your phone batteries and stuff like that. 1D barcodes being replaced by 2D barcodes. Although this is not a new thing, and I think UV is one of the easiest things to reproduce. We're seeing, as we've seen in the past, like one-dimensional UV. We've seen full-color UV, and I mean, doing full-color UV is as simple as getting a color ink cartridge and replacing the ink with, color UV ink instead of regular ink. So that's nothing new. What is kind of difficult is when they mix the holographic ink with the UV ink. But we've seen that defeated with the Alps printer by mixing the holographic Pearl-X material with with our UV pigment powder. Gullichin iris print. Gullichin is security lines where the layout of intersection geometry is unique and it's very hard to reproduce. And iris print is when the colors gradually change shade from one color to the next, which is impossible from a normal style scanner to read that. Some other stuff that's a little more interesting is hidden images available with decoding lenses. So they'll make decoding lenses available for like government agencies, and you'll only be able to see the image with the special decoding lens. And then optically variable ink. You change the angle of the identification card, and you'll see different things on the different colors on the text. IR pigment ink, which is nothing new, and is definitely easy to implement or re-implement. And then if you look at your credit card, you've seen the normal mag stripe color is black, but if you look at your credit card, you'll see that it normally has something written on the mag stripe, and it's usually like blue or like gold, some other color other than black. And, you have to get that customized through a third party to get that security feature done. And then microtext, which is still a very highly secure feature. And that's very, very small text that can only be viewed with a magnifying glass or a microscope. So by far the coolest technology that I've seen is laser engraving. And this is like state of the art. It was introduced in 1998. But the large stakeholders in the industry said, we're going to try as hard as you can not to let you implement this technology because it's going to put our technology out of business. But they're just now emerging, and a lot of governments are now contracting this technology out. And if you have like a green card, you can see this on your green card. The laser engraver actually contains a GPS self-destruct system. So if you take it within 20 meters out of its designated area, it will self-destruct. It will fry its own circuit, so it's pretty cool. It's only licensed for government use. An interesting thing, I was talking to a guy who was implementing this technology, and he also works for the government. He has a kind of like a license to kill in the identification card industry. So what he does is he has permission to take government-issued documents and fraudulently remanufacture them. And he does this, and then he goes to the airport and to government buildings, and he tests them out. So I'm talking to him on the phone, and I'm telling him, yeah, I'm doing some research for the university, He's like, oh yeah, well, are they funding your, they're funding your research? I'm like, yeah, kinda. And he's like, well, what do you think about the IDs in Texas? I'm like, oh, I don't know anything about IDs. I'm just trying to research the Real ID Act. He's like, well, I don't know. I'm sure you have friends. Have you seen any good fake IDs? In Texas? And I'm like, yeah, I guess my friends have fake IDs. They're pretty good. He's like, and then he starts telling me about how, well, his favorite method is to remove the laminate on the and then put in a different picture. And then and I'm like, well, I never heard of that. How do you remove the laminate? And he's like, oh, I can't tell you how to remove the laminate. That's our trade secret. And I'm like, oh, he's like, for all I know, you could be a counterfeiter. And I'm like, oh, that would never happen, And he's like, and so he starts telling me, he's like, so I get this solvent at Walmart, and he tells me the solvent, and I'm like, yeah, and I'm like writing it down. I'm like, yes. And he's like, and then I take it and I just let the card sit in the solvent for like 20 minutes, and then it just peels right off. And then he stops and he's like, you know what? I think I shouldn't be talking to you. And it's like there's like a speech. So he's like, where are you gonna be giving this speech at? And I'm like, oh, it's this conference called DEF CON. He's like, that sounds like one of those hardcore political activist conferences. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of right. And he's like, I think I have to go. So that was the guy that he's promoting this technology. He told me not to mention his name, but he is a really nice guy. Gave me some pretty good tips. But yeah, so this is the newest and coolest stuff, even though it's been out for a while. It basically works like a CD burner does. It penetrates through several layers. It penetrates through something. It implements something called polycarbonate laminate, which the government considers the highest grade laminate in the industry. I have some up here if you want to come touch it later. And it writes on 3 different layers of polycarbonate laminate, and then eventually it will burn into the Tesla as well. So it's completely.
Can I touch your polycarbonate?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt just real quick.
Sure.
Folks, for EFF for charity, if you would like to shoot DT, he's in the shoot simulator. Be there for a while. Room 103. Thank you, guys.
I thought he was coming to arrest me.
We're waiting on after talk because last time they kind of ran across the stage. It was bad.
All right.
Just go out this door.
Yeah, thanks. So it's pretty much completely tamper-proof, and you'll probably be seeing a lot more of it. You'll see it in the Canadian government. I think it was British Columbia or Alberta. they started implementing this technology, and the U.S. government said, well, if you implement this technology, you'll be violating our terms in accordance with the Real ID Act, because we said, we set certain guidelines, and they said, well, we don't care because this technology is way better.
Plus, we're Canada.
Yeah, right. We can do what we want. So they eventually started implementing it, and a lot of the U.S. companies and then the U.S. government caught on and said, well, maybe this technology is pretty good, and then eventually they allowed the Canadian government to driver's licenses to be used on the border. There will be allowing Canadian driver's licenses to be used on the border from Canada to the U.S. So this is like what a futuristic identification card hopefully will look like if we get some parts of the Real ID Act changed. We have like laser engraving, a full color UV image, a 2D barcode, infrared imaging, a kinogram with optically variable ink, a magnetic stripe, as well as cardholder data on the magnetic stripe, including all your biometric information and your personal secrets, like your social security number. And this will have a polyfin core, Teslin core. So overall, we've seen identification cards have been around 100 years, starting with a driver's license. Governments have valid reasons for wanting to deploy security identification cards, but we have to watch out so they don't get abused. Increased concerns on illegal immigration is probably the most driving motivation on the technology innovation. You can become involved in identification card manufacturing at home to maintain your privacy and making your own high security documents. And as we've seen, all identification systems have strengths and weaknesses, but hopefully a robust system will be delivered that will solve some of these problems. So, thank you. So I guess I have like 7 minutes for questions, and then my question room is like 104.
So Tesla's like, it starts out as a paper, then you put it through a plastic laminating pouch. What's the consistency after you get laminated?
It's rubbery, basically. I mean, the question was, what's the consistency of laminate after you laminate it, of Teslin after you laminate it? And it's like a really stretchy material. You can stretch it out. But when you pass it through the laminator and it adheres to the Teslin, it turns real hard.
So hard like a plastic.
Right. Right.
The second question was, the blue background that we see a lot of times in IDs, why blue?
It's just a choice. I mean, I've seen states have blue backgrounds, gray backgrounds. Blues just seems to be like the common, like one state started using it and the rest followed type of thing. There's no mandate that says you have to use blue. All right. I'll be in room 104.